Hello everyone and welcome to a Rapid 2D game tutorial. This is a game where the player will be given 5 coins in order to try and score as high as they possibly can before they pass it on to someone else to see who can score highest. Before we move on to using the Rapid 2D editor, there are a few things that you will need to have installed on your computer. These are Visual Studio 2012 Express or Visual Studio 2012 Professional, the latest Rapid 2D editor release, a basic knowledge of the C++ programming language, and the textures for the Drop the Coin game located on the Rapid 2D website. Okay, so to begin a new project, simply head over to the top left hand corner of your screen and click on the rocket. Then head down to New Project. In the name field, give the project the name Drop the Coin, and then click OK. Now, click on the rocket again and click on Save As, and name the file name field the same as what you named the project, which is Drop the Coin. Okay, so now that we have created a new project, it is time to move on to the editor. This is creating and editing layers. Now, the first thing we're going to do is edit the already created layer. To do this, simply head over to the Game World Scenes Layers and Game Objects bar and click on the Layers tab with the text First Layer. This then makes a layer info box appear on the right hand side of the screen. Now in the layer name field we're going to want to call this Foreground, and then just simply leave everything else the same and click Save. Now to add a new layer, you click on the orange plus symbol located to the right of the text Layers. This then creates a new layer 0. So simply click on this, and then in the layer name, much like we did before, call it Background instead of Foreground. And then, in the layer depth, set this to 1, and then click Save. Okay, so now that we have created our new layers, it's time we imported the textures that you downloaded at the beginning of this tutorial. Now to import textures, it's a very easy process. All we need to do is minimize the editor, locate where we extracted the textures to, which in this case is the folder on the right hand side of the screen, and then we need to open up a separate file explorer and head to My Computer. Now in My Computer, head into the hard drive and then into Program Files, in this case x86. So head into Program Files x86, or your equivalent, and then scroll down until you find Rapid 2D. Now, within this folder, you will see another folder called Projects. Head into this one as well, and then you'll be able to locate your Drop the Coin project. Simply double click on this folder, and then head into the Data folder. From here, we need to click and enter into the Images folder. Now here, all we need to do is select these 4 textures from the right hand side of the screen, using Ctrl+C to copy them, and then click back in the image folder and press Ctrl+V. Now you'll probably get this warning saying that folder access is denied. All you need to do is click Do this for all current items and then Continue. This has now put all 4 of our textures that we will need in this tutorial into the project folder. Now if we head back into the Rapid 2D editor, you'll notice that if we head into the project files in the lower right hand corner and then into textures, you'll be able to see that all of the files we added are now there. Okay, so now that we have created our layers and imported our textures, it's time to create a background image. Now to do this, we create an object. Now we want this object to be specific to the background layer. To do this, simply click and highlight the background layer. Then, head down into the Game Objects and click the orange plus button. Much like when we were creating a new layer, a new object will appear, in this case a game object. Click on it and head to the Name field. Rename this object to Background Image. Simply scroll down until we see this image box. Now within this image box is where we will be applying the background image. So simply head down into the project files and then the textures, and then double click on the plinkoboard.png. Now you will notice that the image has appeared here but not in the game world. To make it appear in the game world, all we need to do is double click plinkoboard.png within the image box at the top. Now this has appeared in the game world, but you may have noticed that it doesn't entirely fit the game world. We can simply change this by affecting the image scale. So if you simply scroll up a little bit more, you will see the scale box. Now in this case we will need to set the image scale of X to 1.4 and 1.4 for Y. This has now marked the orange guidelines. Okay, now we've created our background object and applied a texture to it. Now we need to create and apply a custom collider to it. This custom collider will be used to stop the player object from falling out of the game world much later on in this tutorial. So to create a custom collider, you need to scroll all the way down until you see Set Collider option. Here you'll want to select Custom, and then click on the newly appeared orange plus button. Here you'll be greeted with a new window called Custom Collider Options. Now in the name field, it is best to name the custom collider the same as the object you are attaching it to. In our case, that is the background image. Now, untick Loop. To create a new point for our custom collider, you can click anywhere on the game world. Now, it is best to apply precision when creating a custom collider, so we have two shortcuts that we can use in order to navigate around the game world and zoom in to the points that we are going to want to create a custom collider to. In our case, we are going to be placing a custom collider in every corner of the light blue area. To do this, we are going to use Shift and the scroll wheel to zoom in faster, and then let go of Shift and hold in the scroll wheel to move around the game world. Now in the top left hand corner, we're going to want to click. This creates our first custom collider point, which will then join up to any other points we create. So here we are creating a new point in the top right corner. As you can see, an orange line has formed to create the bond between the 2 points. Now simply apply this to all 4 corners. As you can see though, this bottom left joint is not joined up with the top left. All we need to do is create another point in the top left, and that will create our box. Okay, so now that we've created our background object with all of its textures and custom colliders, we can move on to creating the foreground objects. The foreground objects will be the player and the numerous text objects we will be creating. So to create a new object in the foreground, simply click on the foreground layer and then the orange plus button located to the game objects button. Now click the new game object that it's created, and in the name field give it the name player. Here we're going to want to give it a physics body, and we'll also want to make it dynamic. Now that we have created the player object, it's time to give it a physics body, and we also need to make it a dynamic physics body by clicking the physics body and dynamic boxes. Dynamic means that it will be affected by gravity on its own. So now we need to change its parameters for its density, its bounce, friction and dampening. We need to set these to a density of 3, a bounce of 0, a friction of 0.5 rather, and a dampening of 2. Now that we have done that, we need to apply a texture. So much like before, just scroll down and then double click on the coin.png and then double click on it again. However, you will notice that the object is rather small, so much like we did with the background object, we need to up the scale. In this case, we're going to double the scale, so the X scale and Y scale should be 2. Once we have done this, we need to add a circle collider. To do this, scroll down to the Set Collider option and click Circle. Now, like before, when we were applying the custom colliders, zoom in so you can get a better view of the coin, and change the radius until it fits the coin object. In our case, that is 0.62. Now simply move this object to the top of the screen for now. Now that we've created our player object, it's time that we created our text objects. Now there are two main areas that we are going to be using text objects. The first is the HUD, which will be located in the box on the right hand side of your screen. Then the other areas that will have text objects are one for each score zone. Now again, in the foreground layer, we're going to create a new object. We are going to call this new object Score. This time we will not be using physics body or dynamic or any textures. All we simply need to do is create this object and then drag it to the position we want. We're preferably going to want this halfway in between this box and somewhere near the top. Now, using a Rapid 2D editor shortcut, we can duplicate the object twice. So to duplicate objects, hold Ctrl and press D. Do this twice. Now head into one of the newly created score objects and rename it to Coins, and then on the other one rename it to High Score. Now, in order to move this without affecting its X position, we can transform its Y position by scrolling down to the transform area, and then in the Y section simply scroll down until you reach a position that you feel is comfortable. In this case we are going to use the middle, and then do the same for the high score but place it further down than the coins. Once again press Ctrl D and then go to the name field. This time we're going to want to call it 50 points. This object is one of our score zone objects, so simply click and drag it until it reaches somewhere in between the peg and the wall. Now, just like before, using Ctrl D, duplicate this object and then name it 100 points. Then simply transform its X position so it's in between both the pegs in the middle. Again, duplicate that object and rename it to 200 points. Again, using the transform option will affect its X position to place it in the middle whilst maintaining its Y position. Again, duplicate this object and name it 0 points. Just like before, let's move its X position so it's somewhere in between its pegs. Now, all we need to do is duplicate it again and name it 500 points. Just like before, we'll affect its X position using the transform controls. Now that you've completed the first half of the section, all that's left to do is repeat the same score zones but in reverse, meaning that this area is 0, the next 200, then 100, and then 50. Now that we've created all of the score zone text, it's time we created the reset button. This button will be used in the game to reset the current coins and score. So to create this new reset button, simply hit the orange plus button like you've done before, click on the new game object and call it reset. This does not require a physics body or it doesn't need to be dynamic, so we can leave the physics controls alone. Simply scroll down to the Images tab, and then go into the Project Files, Textures, and then double click on reset.png. Then double click on reset.png in the Game Object window. Now simply move the reset button into the middle of this indent, and resize it to an X of 1.3 and a Y of 1.3. Now that we've created all of the necessary foreground objects, it's time to move on to the actual game board. Now by game board I am referring to the zigzag lines, the pegs, and the vertical pegs in the score zone. Now we could add all of these objects into the foreground layer, but as you can see we've already got several objects in the foreground layer and it would cause too much clutter. What we're going to do instead is create a new layer. Once we've created the new layer, we're going to give it the name Background Items. And give it a layer depth of 1. Now, like before, we're going to create a new object, and we're going to create a blank object. So we're just going to simply name this Vertical Peg. Now, because this is going to be a collidable object, we need to tick Physics Body, and then we are going to leave the density and the friction the same. Now, simply scroll down and select Box Collider, which is selected by default. Then click on the object in the game world and drag it down to one of the pegs, using Shift and Control to zoom in so you can line up the peg with the box. Now simply scroll back up to Scale and change the X scale so it just about fits the peg. Once done, affect the Y scale of the peg until it reaches near the top. Later on we'll be adding a circle collider to the top of these. Now just like before, press Ctrl D and duplicate it. And just like we were doing in a previous example, transform its X position to the next vertical peg. Repeat this until you've completed all of the pegs. Now that we have created all of our vertical pegs, it's time to move on to the zigzag lines. For these we are going to use custom colliders. To do this, simply create a new object without a texture and name it Zigzag Left. Now again, tick the physics body, but do not change any of its parameters. Simply scroll down until we reach the collider option and click Custom. Now before we go and create the new custom collider, we're going to move this object out of the way. If we didn't, then the object, even though it is a dummy and has no texture, would be in the center, and it's already going to be pretty clumped when we put all of the circle colliders in. So simply create a new custom collider and give it the name Zigzag Left. Now that you've done this, using Shift and the scroll wheel, scroll in, and then use the mouse wheel by clicking it in to navigate through the world. Now, untick Loop like we did before, and begin adding the points as shown in the video. Now repeat this step with a new object called Zigzag Right and follow the outline with a new custom collider on the right hand side. Now that we've created both the Zigzag Left and Zigzag Right custom collider and object, it's time to move on to the pegs. So to do this, once again create a new object and give it the name Peg. Now give it a physics body, but do not change any of the parameters. Simply scroll down until you see Set Collider option and tick Circle. Now, move this object over to the top left peg. Using Shift and the mouse wheel, scroll in, and then use the mouse wheel by clicking it in to navigate through the game world. Try and line this up as best you can to the center of the peg. Once done, change the radius of this circle collider to 0.11. As you can see, it just about encapsulates everything. Now, just like before, press Ctrl D and duplicate the peg. And then, transform its X position to the next peg along. Repeat this for the entire game board. Now that we've created all of the necessary collidable objects in our game, it's time to attach scripts to them. But before we can attach a script, we must first create the script. To create a script, head down to where it says Project Files, and then above it you will see an orange C++ button. Simply click this, and in the class name, give it the name Player. and then hit create. Now head back into project files and you'll notice that scripts has our player.cpp file. This is our script that we have just created. To apply it to an object, simply click on the object you want to apply it to, scroll down until you see script, and then double click it. As you can see, it's already attached the script for us. Now we need to repeat this for several items. Those items are reset button, score, coins, high score, points 50, points 100, points 200, points 500, and point 0. So now that we have created all of the necessary objects and attached all of our necessary scripts to these objects, we are now on the final step, and that is simply to move the player object outside of the screen. All you need to do is click on the player object and drag it outside of the guides. The reason we do this will become clear when we move on to the coding stage.